in today's conversation, they're going to be playing the role of debaters. And in playing the role of debaters, they have to actually really think about the mission statement or the motion statement that we're speaking about today and take as aggressive sides as possible to convince each and every one of you to take their side. And therefore I'm saying this is because what they say may not be their personal beliefs. They may not be even things that they care about, but they're going to, for the purpose of keeping you all engaged and entertained and allowing me to do less work, they're going to actually play the role that they need to play. And the motion today that we're speaking about is, should CSR be banned? Yes, Pearl is laughing. And Pearl is laughing because she, like many other people here who are perhaps working at a corporate foundation or in CSR, some of you were doing this before the law was passed, like Pearl has been doing this for decades, and others have started with the CSR. So I think this is also a good opportunity in a debate format to talk about the pros and cons of really what's happening in our country. And I think, again, the voice and the comments being made by the panelists are not their own, so they should get support regardless of what they say on this panel. But that's sort of the goal of today's conversation. The format is going to be that we'll have each side give opening arguments. Then we're going to have you all ask questions, again keeping the debate sort of theme in mind to whomever on the panel you want. Then they will give closing arguments, and then we will see if your opinion as the audience has changed in terms of CSR and should it be banned or should it stay. With that, I'll give a little bit of context of just where we are, I guess, as a country, and a little bit on the CSR side as well. While Vandana was saying it is so nice for all of us to be here today in person, and I want to thank Asia Society and Bloomberg, of course, for making this happen. I think it's important just to realize that majority of citizens in our country are still dealing with and will continue to deal with the ramifications that COVID has brought to them. Hundreds of millions of families have gone back into poverty during this period. Livelihoods have been cut. Education has taken a hit. Healthcare, while we are not wearing masks, does not mean has necessarily come to the same levels it was in 2019. And so while many of you may be from the corporate sector and may have a really good idea of where the world is heading and India is heading in terms of broad economics, I think it's really important just to understand and realize that the trickle-down effect of the economic structures that we have are probably going to take too long to actually get to those who need support. And unfortunately, the number of people who need support today are far greater than ever before. And while we all can come here and sit without masks, I think we should not forget that the majority, again, of our country does not have that privilege. And I lay that context just because whether or not you want to ban CSR or keep it, I think the need of giving more patiently and thoughtfully is far more critical than ever before. And when Vandana was saying the first series that happened in 2020 on this particular conversation was about sort of the planning, how do you measure impact, how do you sort of think about the communities you're trying to support, as well as looking at a degree of transparency and accountability, no one could have predicted what would have happened next. And I say this because the communities, I think, that we're all trying to serve, unfortunately, they've had their version of COVID for generations. They've had their version of not having water 3 days a week, not being able to leave the house, of not being able to attend school. And this is not something that I'm saying happens in like rural India that we've never visited. This happens in every single slum across every single city in the country. And so I think just keeping some of these things in mind is important because regardless of whether you want CSR or not, I think there's a need for funding overall to not just increase, but also be more flexible, realizing the communities we're trying to serve have different lived experiences than we do. Therefore, the patience required in funding is so critical. So I think that's just number one. And I think number two, it's just really important to realize that as givers, as well as NGO leaders, we're actually doing very very little. It's the woman in the community who's lifting herself and her family out of poverty, and we just have to keep that in mind whenever we participate in this sector, because there becomes a time where either we're a check writer of our own funds or our corporate funds or an NGO saying this is the solution. We need to realize that we actually are doing the least amount of work, and having that level of trust and humility is really, really important. That being said, I think we're going to start with the first question of today's debate. So we need everyone to take their mobiles out, because I need you all to vote. And so this is a debate, so we're going to take your vote at the beginning of the debate and the end of the debate and see which side sort of wins. We have a side here, which is Priya and Vandana, that are saying CSR is the best thing since sliced bread. It's amazing. Look at all the great changes that have occurred and how corporates are finally giving. I was speaking to somebody earlier today who has an office in this building saying next year CSR giving, because of the phenomenal work that the corporate sector of India is doing, is going to be 30,000 crores. Absolutely phenomenal. And so when you think about that, and India being one of the only countries in the world that's mandating CSR because less than 10% of our population earn enough to pay taxes, this is the best thing that's happened since sliced bread, and Priya and Vandana are going to convince you why this is awesome. On the flip side, I have Trishya and Raj, and they're going to say, CSR sucks. Our families have been giving well before the law has been passed. There's far more flexibility. We don't have to ensure funds are being spent by the end of a fiscal year. There's just so much more giving that we as a country have been doing well before a law was passed. In fact, there's a lot of conversations on how Carnegie decided to give his wealth away because of a meeting he had with Swami Vivekananda at the World Fair in Chicago 125 years ago. And therefore, the sort of birth of modern philanthropy, as the world knows it, has actually been rooted in what Indians have done to push to say community engagement, involvement, and upliftment is as much a business priority as making profits. And we have multiple families over the years who've had this belief, and therefore why mandate it and regulate it in the manner that it has. So these are the two debates, or two sort of teams that we have, and we're going to have opening arguments from each side, then we're going to open up to you all, and then they'll give their closing arguments. Any questions? Has everyone voted? Okay, so if you want to just take a look, should CSR continue or cease to exist? Oh, so I think it's a questioning problem. So let's do this again, and let's just say, should it continue?
Yes.
So,
that's what they were voting for.
Yeah? Okay, so wow. So 23 people say, of course it should continue, and 2 people say, or 3 people say no. And when we end this debate, the goal is not to see which side wins, meaning is the 23 going to switch? No. The goal actually for the debaters is, can the individuals who got 3 votes change that to 5, 7, or 10 votes? Because it's about changing opinions, and hopefully this then panel has been somewhat useful. With that, or it's the opposite. No, exactly. Then you all win. Exactly. I mean, y'all already have an upper hand, clearly. Yeah, it's gone now. Don't worry about it. Sorry.
We can't vote.
Do you want? We can put it up again if you'd like, and y'all can just vote. But we'll start the debate either way. So I'm going to start on this side of the room and give Priya a mic. Yeah, I think it's on. Just check, Priya.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to time you so then everyone has an equal opportunity to speak. So we're going to actually keep this to 5 minutes per person. And then we're going to open it up to the audience and then come back.
I've spent my entire life avoiding debates, and at this age you're getting me to do this.
Yes.
Okay, so 3 reasons really. 1, India is at the bottom of most indicators when it comes to social progress. And we need all the resources that we can get. And the excellent thing about the CSR regulation is that companies have to give money, which means that NGOs, and there's 3.3 million of them, have a consistent, significant source of income that's coming in year after year, right? So in the last 7 years, companies have given more than $1 trillion to the nonprofit sector. That amount is going up by 15% every year and will continue to do so as the corporate sector really does better. And knowing that there is an assured sum of money that's coming year after year is the only way that NGOs will build capacity and really continue to scale up the fantastic work that they do for all of our poor. The second point is, and we heard this time and time again, is that it's become a boardroom conversation. So today, some of our best and brightest and most networked and the most resourced individuals, at least 4 times a year, have exposure to or are thinking about their role as individuals and their role as corporate citizens, right? What more can we ask for? If really our best and brightest are thinking deeply about how our country needs to be transformed and have the resources to do so, then it is really such a positive trend. And it's not just the people in the boardroom. The fact that volunteering is so popular is not just good for building capacity of NGOs, but we're now seeing this increasing trend of people who are moving on from the corporate sector and participating very actively in the NGO ecosystem because of the CSR regulation. It's given people an exposure, a meaning, a deep connection with the social sector like never before. And the third is, and I want to pick up on Deval's point, we went through a crisis and the poor go through a crisis every single day of their lives, right? They cannot rely only on the government, or only on the private sector, or only on their employers. What is phenomenal about the CSR regulation is that the private sector becomes a key stakeholder in India's development. It is the private sector with the public sector, with the philanthropic ecosystem, with people's movements, with the financial sector. They're all around that table because of the regulation. And they themselves are coming together to ensure that they can collectively solve India's problem. We're putting together a $500 million fund to irreversibly increase incomes of 10 million workers and entrepreneurs. Without the CSR regulation, we did not have the opportunity to engage with the private sector, not just to write that checkbook, but really to understand how are they going to meaningfully transform the lives of the 10 million workers or micro-entrepreneurs that are part of their workforce. The CSR regulation gives you an authentic mechanism that's mandated by the government to begin the engagement. When I first started working in CSR, I remember this room of 100 lawyers, and I asked people just around the room, the regulation had already come through, and I asked, how many of you really want this regulation to happen, right? Not a single person within the 100 picked up their hands. 5 years later, when I asked the same question to a similar set of audiences, 100 people in that room lifted up their hands. So clearly what was not welcome, what was resisted so strongly by the private sector, is now being embraced because it is really the only way that the corporate sector can also participate as a meaningful citizen. And while the law is limited in its imagination of what the private sector can do, because the focus is very much on expenditure, we really believe, in the many conversations and the engagements we've had, that really the private sector sees this as a way to unlock their resources, their networks, their business energies to solve problems that are important both to them and for the rest of us. So I think it should stay, but I also think that the scope of it should be widened so that they can become a very active, thoughtful participant in our development.
And as I said, we're all playing roles, so Tim Sebastian's role is to ask very rude and challenging questions. In fact, Ronnie, right now when we're having breakfast, he was like, yeah, but Tim was asking those questions. I'm like, no, but I have to do that now. So I'm also playing that role. You talk about boardroom conversations on development. First of all, poverty as a whole is actually an output of capitalism as we see it. Boardrooms are typically consisting of individuals who've never had lived experiences of the communities that we're trying to serve. How can corporate leaders who may be A, the problem, or B, not understand the problem, dictate what a worker who's selling vegetables across the street of their home, how can they enable that to happen when they're kind of the problem, and how come their views are now all of a sudden, because they're writing the checks, are being heard versus the community's view?
Yeah, so I'm not sure capitalism is the problem to begin with, but having said that...
Poverty is man-made.
And not by the private sector necessarily. But having said that, I'm not saying that they are fully qualified on day one to make those decisions, and we saw it playing out 7 years ago, right? A lot of the decisions that companies were making for the first time, because they were forced to, weren't exactly the smartest. But I think that over a period of time, boardrooms have now been exposed to a series of conversations with, not just amongst themselves, but with NGOs and with the government and with the philanthropic ecosystem, and with a lot of other board members who are sitting on boards of NGOs, right, which is also a positive trend. So I feel like it may not have begun with everyone knowing exactly what they needed to do, but over a period of time, because of the knowledge, the insights, the data, the resources, the conversations that we collectively as a sector have presented to them, I'm seeing a better movement towards a much more inclusive world.
Got it. So when it started, it wasn't that great. Right now, it's not perfect, but it's getting at least better. Okay, Raj, your turn.
All right. Well, I'm glad that Deval is also feeling some pressure to perform. It's on all of us, but okay. Anyways, I think I'm going to take the position that CSR, as it currently stands, needs to be actually torn down because in its current form, it's limiting and performative. It's a tick-the-box exercise. It's only related to finances, and at best, it's a brand-building exercise, or if I'm to be a little controversial, a whitewashing, or maybe more recently, greenwashing exercise, right? And I mean, why do I say this? Let's look at the history of CSR. It has its roots in the Industrial Revolution, and human life, as we knew it, changed to pivot to put in labor in factories. There was also problems with that because conditions in factories were terrible, people weren't being paid, mass production had unsafe working conditions, and so people took steps. I think I'll just use chocolate because we all like chocolate. I think Hershey was one of the first people who said, I'll help my employees buy houses, I'll create parks for their families. Some other chocolate companies said, we're actually not going to have child slavery when it comes to getting cacao from Ghana. Right? So that's the root, that's the history. Our own Indian version of it, who bankrolled our freedom struggle, and where is that fire today? It's lost. I don't see that justice anywhere. At that point, a lot of our industrialists were also saying, what are the industries we need to get into to put more pressure on the British? What's going to make us financially independent? How do we put pressure on them for economic tariffs? Very far cry today from what we see on our annual reports. And unfortunately, we seem to have copy-pasted current Western CSR in all of its forms. Technocratic, top-down, corporate-led. And so that's the problem with CSR as I see it today. Where is it? Is it really impactful? I know that NGOs are getting money. We all have massive problems. Who are the NGOs that are getting money? It's NGOs or people who head these NGOs who look like us, talk like us, walk like us. How do NGOs that are at the grassroots find CSR funds? Do we have any transparency around that? Can a non-English speaking NGO get funds? I mean, these are all questions that we need to ask ourselves, right? And what about unsexy causes? Who's going to fund mental health? Who's going to fund palliative care? Sure, education, lovely, great, slap a picture of a girl sitting at a desk. It's done, it's all over. That's where the responsibility ends. And so if we are using our own social networks to give NGOs money, we are not changing anything in the system. And systems born out of inequalities will never create change. So, the other problem is, and this is a big problem in India, caste. If we are giving out money when it comes to social privilege, there are only people who are of a certain caste who will also get that money. And in even worse cases, sometimes CSR funds their own NGOs. We also have that problem. And so, I think what would social responsibility look like if we banned CSR? And I'm going to say it, because how do we envision something different if we're going to ban something, right? And tell me about my time.
You have 30 seconds.
Okay, maybe I'll save it for my closing.
So, thank you, Raj. So, like you said, India itself was born out of philanthropy backing various civil movements across the country. Yet those same donors have not given the $1 trillion that Priya just spoke about that has happened in the last 7 years. When we talk about the West, which you just alluded to, the West has multiple foundations, whether it's Bloomberg, like we just heard, giving 95% to 97% of his wealth away, Piero Midyar, Bill Gates, the list goes on in America in terms of family foundations that have been set up to actually alleviate suffering of the poor in that country as well as globally. In our country, we have the Screwvalas, we have the Premjis, we have Tatas, but we can only count them on maybe 10. And so clearly the families are not stepping up because India is mean, or the rich are mean. And so without a law, we're not going to actually get $1 trillion of funding coming in. And you talk about issues such as caste and English language, but these were there well before the law was passed. And NGOs and private philanthropy has been operating for so many decades. How come that didn't solve it? And how come CSR in just 7 years, they're a baby. In just 7 years, how come they can solve this?
I think I'm going to take umbrage with the word solve. And as you said, all of these problems are very old. I don't know if CSR has solved it. But, as I said, the amount of money or impact or scale, none of it is going to matter if you don't have inclusion. I mean, a company can take a step and say, sure, I'm going to sell my products only to the rich people who can go to the malls and afford them. And sure, if that's your kind of goal, go for it. But if we're talking about the masses here in India, unless you change the way you do things, the amount of money that you pour in is not going to matter. And coming from the mental health field, I'd say, and don't use this. It's not a phrase I like to use, but they said the very definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
Thank you, Raj. Vandana, over to you. I think actually Raj brings up a very good point around inclusion, and Vandana actually brought this up as well, that I'm the token male panelist on this panel, and I say that because perhaps not just Bloomberg, but many industries across the country are still male-driven and run. In fact, even though I started my career at an investment bank, nowadays when I go to investment banks and see 95% males there, I feel uncomfortable. So when we're talking about a society which is patriotic in nature, which drives a lot of the inequalities that exist, how can those same people, again, to my follow-up question of Priya, who have actually been a cause of the problem, if not the only thing that has created this problem, how can those same people decide on what is needed for those who've already been left out of the system?
So I'm terrible at debates because I'm nodding along with Raj and people saying I agree with so much of what they're saying. And I'm also looking at your notes. What are you going to ask me? So I can't think of any, leader of a nonprofit who actually does this work every day who's going to say we shouldn't have CSR be mandated. And so I'm on the easy side, according to my, opinion. But I've run two fairly large nonprofits over the last 15 years. One is the Akanksha Foundation, and currently at Avanti Fellows. At Akanksha, we made a very big decision early on in my time there to transition from running after-school centers to running full-blown schools, which is a very great idea, but it's really expensive. It's really expensive to run schools, and when the exciting risk capital, right, who wants to come in, who loves your new idea, gets bored of your idea, who is going to fund those schools, right? And this is 27 schools across three of Maharashtra's biggest cities, Mumbai, Pune, Nagpur, that cost crores and crores of money to run because the government gives us the infrastructure, they give us all of the hardware, but the software is up to us. And we've taken on the responsibility of running of those schools, in perpetuity, because those are children's lives, those are families' lives, those are communities. The future of those communities often depend on the quality of the schools that we're running, the education they're getting in them. And I can say with a lot of confidence that we wouldn't have the confidence to expand the network of our schools if we didn't have the security that CSR provides us. So at Akanksha, at least when I left, I still serve on the board, it's 70 to 80% of our money from India is from CSR. Even in Avanti Fellows, we run large-scale coaching programs preparing the poorest kids from the most disadvantaged. So speaking of inclusion, we're talking about kids from the most rural areas of India, often speaking of caste from SC, ST backgrounds, who are enormously bright and capable, but there's no way at an annual income of 1 to 2 lakhs, a family and annual income of 1 to 2 lakhs, would they be able to afford private coaching, which costs at least that. So we're providing that annual coaching free of cost to these almost 40,000 children across the country. 50% of that money is coming from CSR. Do I have, yes, there's families that were doing this before. Yes, there's families that had that mindset, that value system before. But there are, and I'm not going to name any of these companies, but there are new faces, new names that have come over the trajectory of my career that I know have been, at least, the initial seed of it came from a push, right? It came from a mandate. It may have evolved over time, to your point, Deval, of, as they engage with you, with your work, they understand the problem. I'm going to take an optimistic view of human nature and say that as people understand these challenges, they feel very committed to being part of that solution. And I'm going to take an optimistic view that the leaders, even if we come from privilege, are doing this work because we want to be inclusive, because we want other people to have the opportunities that we have had.
No, thank you, Vandana, and I appreciate you tugging the hearts of everyone by speaking about the children that both Avanti Fellows as well as Akanksha supports. But with the current laws, you have to spend your money by March 31st. Which child that you work with from Avanti or Akanksha, education ends on March 31st of every year? Just a question.
I agree with it. What do you want me to say?
Thank you, Vandana.
That doesn't mean it shouldn't exist.
And just to be clear, it's the current law in its shape or form. And again, the reason I'm saying that is because otherwise everything will be, and we're all very good at saying, maybe. With that said, Trishya, I would love to understand from you, again, these great organizations that Vandana just spoke about are educating kids across the country, and the donors that continue to support, and many of the families are very well known, and they still continue to support both of these initiatives, in fact, but they don't have the capacity to support in the level that they need to. And so if issues in the country are, for example, at 1 billion strong, private philanthropy just has not picked up pace and cannot, and it shouldn't be reliant on just a few individuals who have the goodness of their heart. It should be everyone across the sector. And so how do you respond to that, and why should we ban CSR when it's done such good work for Avanti and Akanksha children?
So true. However, a lot of the conversations so far have been around the increase in funding that's gone into the development sector in the last 8 or so years. And I think that's maybe one of the key challenges of our current approach to CSR in the country, that the focus is really financial utilization. And so a couple of points and challenges and serious limitations, I think, that come as a result of that. One is that I think as a country we continue to have this perception of I need to have before I can give. Specifically, I need to have funding in order to give, and I think we miss out on all the incredible resources outside of funding that can really be harnessed, especially in a country like India, towards giving and towards creating meaningful change. I think a lot of the short conversations we had even before this panel was about skill building and mentoring and volunteering, and I think that entire piece and utilizing resources like skills and time is completely limited. And I think this is what will allow giving to be something that everybody can do, not as a mandate for companies earning over a certain amount, that to in profit only, and so on and so forth. So I think there is that serious limitation of the way that we look at and approach CSR today. I think the other question is also, if it's all about funding allocation within a fiscal year, within compliance related, etc., then less focus on really what is the impact or where my funding is going, for numerous reasons. One is, as a corporate, I have my annual report, and now in a best case we have 3 years of impact that we're measuring, and I think we all have the experience at Akanksha and Avanti that 1 year, 3 years is too little to really measure any change. Any sustainable change requires some serious investment before, over a lot of time, we can review that. And again, I think it results in very short-term projects, projects that are very, as Raj also touched upon, very tangible. Yeah, 44 or something % of CSR funds have gone to 2 causes: education and disease prevention. So things that are more tangible, things that are more, I have my stats and figures. And so we're seeing a lot of funding going into the same popular areas, into the certain states based on where corporates operate. And so, the question is this, yes, there's more money coming in, but is it really fulfilling a real gap? And is it really fulfilling a real need? And what is really the impact that it's having? More money, yes, but towards what end? Towards what goal? And I think the last point that I want to kind of mention is coming back to actually the term social responsibility, and I think that's something Raj also touched upon, that what really is social responsibility, and has CSR, with the advantages that it's brought for sure, has it really changed the way we operate? Has it really brought out more responsibility in individuals, in organizations, in business practices? And I'm not so sure, because I think there's a little bit of a danger if As a company, for example, I am a water negative company, and my CSR initiatives involve tree plantation or solar power, whatever it might be. There's a real danger in this approach of CSR because it's not really creating any sustainable change from the roots. The problem is the same. I'm still creating the same negative impact that I have been for years. Now I just get to, add a little bit of good PR and goodwill, and in a way I'm giving this message that giving or social responsibility is compromise. That I can do bad and I can negate it with good, and hey, we're all good. And I think that goes fundamentally against really this idea of meaningful change that I think Priya spoke about at the beginning. And that's what we're missing with CSR.
No, thank you for that. But then when we look at private philanthropy, for example, it's the same people, again, who've earned money from, let's just say, a corrupt corporate society who are then giving it away and mandating they do it in their manner. So it's whether it's a corporate boardroom who at least is not just one individual deciding, but there are 6 or 7. We have independent board members on corporate boards now. We have greater autonomy as well as transparency in CSR on what's happening. Isn't this better than one individual who's made a lot of money primarily through perhaps more monopolistic manner, sort of then deciding this is what India should look like?
I guess what I'm trying to say is that what about the resources outside of finance? I can't say that the funding has nothing to do with it. Of course, that is a big piece in the pie. But there's so you look at the younger generations today. There's a huge need and want to give back and contribute, and I think we are limiting it when all we are talking about is how we're allocating our funding. And I think if we have not just government mandates but also incentives that really allow each of the private, public, and development sectors to really come together and work on it together, each one harnessing their own strengths. So it's not your NGOs are being pushed to corporatize themselves and speak the legal language in order to be able to focus on compliance, and money that CSR does not easily support in the NGO, for example, and the funds are going into areas that perhaps are in any case or should be in any case under the government purview. Can we really bring it together that each plays their own role and sort of harnesses it towards one direction rather than it being a mix-up, which is, I think, where we are today.
Great, thank you. We're going to open it up to the audience. We have a question right there. I don't think we have a mic. Is that okay? We have an extra one? Oh, thank you. I think there's somebody, right in front of me, and she just took off her mask as well, so please give her the mic first, and then there's a question there, and then, yes, thank you.
Hello? Sorry, it's too loud. So, thank you so much for having me here. I'm Amrit. I represent United Way Mumbai. My question is to the Against panel. So, Trishya, you mentioned about CSR only being financially important. So, my question is that what stops a company from doing philanthropy? Why does it have to only be CSR? And how many companies are actually doing philanthropy without a need for CSR reports? And why do companies worry about output? That's my question.
Well, I think to start with even the question that you, I think, ask, going to the impact of CSR on companies. I think then the question is really, there's more money being put in, but really towards what impact? What stops corporates from giving back? I don't know to say. I think I'm on the wrong side for that one. I think there's various reasons, but I think again incentivization, for example, with the organization that a Lighthouse project which is a youth mentoring program that is a fully volunteer-run program. We do see a lot of corporates really looking to encourage this idea of volunteering among employees to promote promote it as much as they can, but there is no incentivization towards the volunteers. It lands up being a relationship that we have more independently with their employees rather than really something that's fueled and supported and creating a community of creating change inside out from my own company outside. And instead it becomes this approach of, okay, here are the outside-in interventions that we do as a company and let it trickle down. And I think maybe if we can shift this a little bit to make it something that's more inside out and let this change and this approach of bringing more responsibility start within and with us. And it could be in small projects within the organization or based on the skills of the organization. Maybe it can even change the approach and engagement of the company itself. And then what an amazing impact it can have. You know, it doesn't have to be either or, but I think when it comes from inside out, the impact possibility is huge. And then you add your funding that comes in with the corporate, and it's a whole new ability to create an impact, because it comes from an inside out approach rather than the other way around.
Hi, I'm Michael Vonk with the Canadian Consulate. I think that you guys have addressed two different components of CSR, and it'd be nice to split them up. The first one being when the companies, corporations take care of their own employees or remediate the environment or things like that I don't really think those are CSR. Those are market failures when they don't happen. But on the other hand, CSR being corporate giving to causes that are not of their own making, then that's more of what I would see it as CSR. And then that opens up the question of, well, are corporations the right ones to do it? Because who actually represents the people? Is it governments that represent the people, in which case, instead of a 2% requirement on taxation, or you could have taxation, right, instead of a 2% requirement. So I think that's kind of where the debate hasn't been heard.
And so, Michael, would you like to ask the question to any of the panelists along those lines, or?
Yeah, I just want to ask, is that
if you could just name which panelist, or which group even, that'll be great.
I'd like to ask the yes side. Yes, is that an appropriate way to look at it, and is there a role for government to do some of that instead of the private sector?
So the government has had that responsibility, right? And I'm not sure it has succeeded as well as it should have. So I think that the CSR regulation in some sense was a mandated request for help from the private sector to say we can't do it alone. We really need the resources, the networks, the expertise that the private sector brings that the government doesn't necessarily have. So there were two questions you asked. One, would a tax have been more efficient? I don't think so. Because I think the nuance, the engagement, the insights that companies, their employees, their stakeholders bring to the social sector is vital. And if the government had kept the private sector out, that would not have been good for any of us as a society. So the fact that it's a way to engage with them year after year is really quite outstanding. The law is extremely limited in its imagination to say what should companies do. I completely agree with all of the points that they made, that if it had been a lot more about being a truly responsible citizen, so change your practices, be far more invested in the success of the most marginalized communities that you engage with, that would have been a much more sort of inspired regulation. So I would say two things. One, I think it's a start. It's a way to at least bring them around the table and sensitize them. Second, I'm hoping that at least a fraction of those that have now been inspired and because they're engaged will be motivated to change the practice. The reality is the only way to change it is another regulation. I'm not sure that this gentle nudging approach really goes too far in a country like ours.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Madhav Joshi from India Health Fund and Tata Trusts. My question to the panel is there a case to move from giving to catalyzing financial and non-financial resources? And if there is, how can that actually be done?
Which side should answer this question?
I'd love to hear both sides.
Okay.
Can I take it? If you want to go first.
Actually, no, because I want to make sure everyone has one chance to answer questions. So I'm going to go ahead and answer. Sorry. I hope that's okay, Priya.
Well, I mean, I think money is catalytic. Because, I mean, that is the reality of it, right? Like, I mean, the ideas exist, the passion to execute them exists, but they just need money. And, you know, when we first started our schools, here's an example, we were exploring two avenues. We were exploring, you know, partnering with the government to the point around, you know, how can you engage with government? And we were exploring, can we start low-cost private schools, these afford-budget private schools that we hear about in the slum communities, urban slums. And what we realized is, and it's tempting, right? Because you think, oh, this is a financially sustainable model, right? And corporates get excited. The same money will, you know, do so much more. And when I looked at, you know, how are these schools surviving? They were paying their teachers, you know, 90%, 80 to 90% less than, you know, what we were paying. They weren't registered, and they were in, you know, kind of decrepit buildings in the middle of these communities. And so we made the choice to partner with government and take over government schools and run them, you know, in partnership. And I think that the money that we receive to do that is catalytic, and you know, and has been able to inspire, you know, similar work that is an enabler of that work. And so I don't want to undermine, you know, the others, you know, money for the, you know, in sake of the other stuff. I think it really needs that kind of investment. And sadly, you know, a lot of us, you know, do fundraising in the U.S., right? And we have entities that we partner with in the U.S. who are able to provide that. And most of that money in the U.S. is raised from individual philanthropists, right? Indians who are living abroad, who care about giving back to India, and they give their own personal wealth towards our causes. That doesn't happen here. It just doesn't. If I think about the sources of our funding, right, over the years. And so I just want to, you know, kind of stress, I guess, how catalytic that actual money has been, and the other forms of partnership are really nice to have, but I think it really actually comes down to money.
Raj, just so we have diversity in the panel answers, go ahead.
So can it be catalytic in financial and non-financial ways? Sure, but I'm going to like stir the pot and say that this sort of a question is emblematic with what is wrong in CSR today, because CSR commitments, CSR language is all very weak and wishy-washy in terms of obligation and precision. So we need to get that down first before we discuss catalytic stuff.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Great panel. I'm Aarti. I'm from Yunus Social Business. And while I'm really enjoying this conversation, I want to push it a little bit. Because I agree with Trishya and I agree with Raj that when we're talking about what corporates can do to give back, by focusing on CSR, we're only focusing on that 2%, but there is huge untapped potential in that 98%. And in a world where we're talking about ESG, where we're talking about sustainability, where we're talking about stakeholder capitalism, what's it going to take? Question to you as sort of next generation philanthropists, as business leaders, what do you think is the role of that 98%? What are the concrete things that 98% can do to address some of these systemic issues? How can we look beyond CSR?
Who do you want to answer if you the other one?
Anyone on the floor or anyone on this group?
Anyone who has an opinion, Trisha or Raj?
Okay.
Perhaps.
Okay.
Sorry, was it a tough question? Sorry about that.
No. I just have to use my closing argument and answer Mr. Deval. You can free me from my closing argument.
Can you repeat the question in short? Okay, what can you do with your core business to solve for societal problems? Let's not just talk about CSR.
But your question is, what can make that happen, right? How do you get that to happen?
How do you get that to happen, and what can you do? Okay, scratch that. I'm not using my closing argument.
So maybe Priya, let's have you start with that.
Let me
Yeah.
also address the other one. Yeah, so I think that's the concept of shared value, right? How does a business fundamentally change who they are and their responsibility to society? Now, I don't think, I know I said regulation is important, but the good part is that there are many, many forces really demanding that accountability from the private sector today. The employees are demanding it, the customers are demanding it, the regulators are demanding it. And so I think it is a combination of all of those and us as citizens, right, today. And I had this sort of bizarre conversation with somebody who said, the only way to shame a company is to go on Twitter and shame the CEO. And all of this other like nice, gentle, data-related, report-related stuff that we tend to do, none of that works. Just go, call the CEO out, shame him, and then his entire PR machinery will start responding to an issue, right? It's tragic that we've come to a state like that. But I think the only way is also for us to collaborate with both. One, demanding much greater accountability, but second, to also provide real solutions. Because again, I think the point that you made, which is if you push a company far back enough, they're going to be defensive in their response. As opposed to, if we can collectively say, well, here is the business and the social case for why your entire 100% needs to change. And I think it's that kind of dialogue, support, that will really help you see a transformation from our corporate sector. Can I please respond to the catalytic?
Yes.
So two things. Our engagement model with the companies that we work with, and we don't work with too many of them, is to say, be a demonstrator. Be really good at whatever it is that you've committed to do. Become a thought leader. Create the data, the evidence, the knowledge, the insight to say what it is that you've done well. And be a catalyst. Because there is no way that you as a company can solve India's poverty, education, mental health, suicide issues, right? And we're now weaving that into the journey that we have with companies because they need to see the last picture as well, right? They need to know what their exit is. And I'm not saying 100% of our corporates, but X% of our corporates are walking that journey. I do want to answer the question about sort of unlocking financial resources. So as part of COVID, we had this moment where we said the entire nano, micro, enterprise sector today is starved of money. Banks won't lend to them. And, unless these businesses prosper, the society doesn't prosper, right? And so today we're actually, within the CSR regulation, creating a series of instruments, returnable grants, credit guarantees, etc., which enable the company to put risk capital to, in some sense, incentivize the private sector and the financial markets to unlock support for communities that today are starved of that money. I'll just give you a very quick example. If Asian Paints puts together a credit guarantee that enables working capital for its painters, not only is it good for their business, it's good for the entire business. It's good for all of us, right? Our painters are not constantly asking us for money up front. They actually have the working capital to grow. So the question is, within the ambit of the CSR regulation, which unfortunately we can't change, can you create creative mechanisms to allow the private sector to engage far more systematically with the financial sector, with the government, to come up with compliant but creative means to unlock all of this capital that exists. We are attempting to do it and do it at scale, and I think it very much can and should be done.
Great. So unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions. I'm so sorry because we have closing arguments now. And so thank you, Priya. And just because I think this is clearly an amazing thing that people should look at, and to the earlier question as well, is this allowed under the CSR law, or is it something that over time will be allowed? Just so then those who are representing corporates can start thinking about not just the 2%, but the 98%.
So everything we do within the regulation. as restrictive as it is, but all of the blended finance work that we're doing, returnable grants, credit guarantees are all permissible within the regulation, and it's unfortunate that we as a sector have to be creative as opposed to just straightforward in how we do it. The only way to do it, Deval, is really to do it at scale. So we're working with 50-odd organizations, including Pearl's organization, to do it systematically, right? Work with many companies so it becomes part of what is commonly accepted. Do it with many NGOs so you build capacity of the NGO ecosystem. Do it with the government, show it to them, show them that this is good because it addresses Atmanirbhar Bharat and all of their other schemes. So I think the only point is not to show it really as an innovation, but to show it as a, hey, all of us can do it, we can do it at scale, it's integrated, it's good for everybody. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone needs to win. If anybody loses the entire thing comes crashing down, right? So.
No, thank you. With that, Raj, I'm going to have you start with the closing arguments.
Okay, so because I said it should be banned, so what makes it then corporate social responsibility, right? I'm going to focus on two words, social and responsibility. I'm actually going to ask for something much bigger. For me, corporate social responsibility will be business self-regulation with the aim of being socially accountable. Now, this includes, yes, improving working conditions, reducing carbon footprints, but it's what Trishya said earlier, with the water negative company example. It should be a manifestation of a business's recognition of its duty and reparations. I mean, COP27 just got over. All the LMICs are asking for loss and damages. Same thing. Companies must take accountability for all the externalities they take granted for. The role of the environment, labor chains, unpaid care work from women, and essentially a structural lack of human rights. And that's what enables them to do their work and earn the profits. And so be socially responsible. And that's really all I'm asking for. Because we can't start fires on one end and hand out burn-all on the other.
Great, thank you. I know other people had questions, and I've got a thing that said I have to take 2 more questions, but I'm also very cognizant that we have timing issues. And what I mean by that is I'm very clear we need to stop at 11 o'clock, because at least that's how I like to run things on time, and therefore I want all the closing arguments to finish, and then if we have time after that, I'll definitely have another question. Sorry for those of you who have questions. But I think, Priya, would you like to go with your closing argument next? And I just wanted to thank all the panelists. All of you have taken notes. You're looking at your phone. They all called me this whole week, so they've really been preparing for this, which is why I think for those who have questions, I want to give them a chance to do what they've researched and speak about it.
Yeah, so just 2 things. I think we need the money that the corporate sector has to give. I mean, we desperately need it because we don't have too many other sources. And second, we need their active participation in a way that it changes fundamental behavior. And without a regulation that brings them to the table, we're not going to be able to change that behavior.
Going off what Priya just said, I do want to clarify something. Definitely the funds are essential and needed and important, but I think the challenge that I want to reiterate is that if the main parameters of impact and measurement is only financial utilization, then it's very, very limiting. And so I think we need to find a broader, more holistic way of looking at change. How exactly, I don't think I'm in the best position to say, but perhaps I can offer some direction to say, can we look at, for example, rather than just when funds are allocated and what compliance and what field and what geography and by what time in the year, can we look at something a little bit more, number one, a little bit deeper in the sense of looking at also where the impact is. For example, how can we harness the heart and passion of the grassroots NGOs? How can we harness the experience and skills of the businesses? How can we harness the reach and resources of the government to really bring it together to make it a as we touched upon, the responsibility that is collective, and not directed by one of the stakeholders alone. And I think, one of the examples that I think everyone here will relate to that I mentioned, because I know I've experienced it a lot, is the challenge that comes, for example, with CSR that I think a lot of NGOs face, is this need to corporatize, to build their own legal and compliance departments in that sense. And I think something that I've seen, that CSR is very willing to fund experts and consultants to come in and help the NGOs for the duration of their project, rather than to actually build capacity of the NGO. And it comes back to the question of, well, what is the impact that we want to have? What is the change that we want to do? Is it just about my 3-year project, or is it really systemic change that I want to create? And I think if we really want to look at something more holistic, if we want to look at something more long-term in terms of change, I think we need to look at an approach that's a little bit more holistic than just financial allocation. I'll just stop there.
So I'm just going to pick up from the opposite side, and I'm just thinking about, why are we all here, right? We're here because we're in the business of solving problems. And so, if I have a problem statement in front of me at Avanti, our problem statement is, if you look at the best engineering colleges in the country that have the highest likelihood of employment, right? So we've done this analysis. We've looked at the National Institute rating framework and looked at what are the colleges that have a median salary of 3 to 4 lakhs when you graduate and a high likelihood of placement. And what we found is that there are about 4 lakh seats in the entire country that offer that. And using, EWS and the boards that the students, kind of graduated from as a proxy, it looks like it's about 80-20 in terms of 80% of those students are coming from private schools and 20% of them are coming from EWS category, which is about an 8 lakh income, right? So if you think about the real poor, it's probably 5 to 10% of that population who's occupying those 4 lakh seats. So at Avanti, we've said, as an organization, can we be a catalyst for solving this problem in the country? Which means that even if you're not trying to be proportionally representative, but you're just trying to be equal, 50-50 representation, it means that we need to coach 2 lakh students, right, every year, half of them being girls. Girls are seriously underrepresented in these fields as well. And what kind of money does it take to do that, right? So if our estimate is about 200 to 300 crores a year. Can an NGO actually afford to raise that? So when you're thinking about catalysts for this, right? I think corporates can be catalysts for that in many ways, right? They have relationships with other corporates, they have relationships with foundations, they have relationships with wealthy individuals, they have relationships with governments, right? Can you be a part of that large problem that we're trying to solve, and not just, yes, you can be compliant, you can say, I am going to do this and that. And that would be my push, is to think about this from a problem-solving perspective and not just a compliance perspective.
You have the votes, and only 12 people have voted, so please, everyone, continue to vote. It's happening. Oh, the question has changed.
In the current form has been added.
Yeah, so the current form is critical. And again, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, participants, for playing this game with me and doing all of the research. I think what hopefully the big takeaway is, CSR or any form of funding is good but not perfect. And I think hopefully for everyone in the room, we've given you an insight on ways that CSR can be improved, because in my conversations with all 4 panelists, it was very, very clear in the current form, it's not the best as the media says it is, as mainstream population says that it is, and a lot of these sort of intricacies of CSR is just not well known. And so from Priya's point, different forms of capital is currently not the norm of CSR, and it is inflexible. To Vandana's point, while it's been great to enable groups to scale, initially both Avanti Fellows and Akansha was starting with private philanthropy, and those private philanthropists, just because I know both of those organizations, thanks to Vandana quite well, are the ones who are giving the most flexible funds to these organizations. So CSR is not a replacement for private philanthropy at all. On this side, I guess the main thing was CSR should come from within, so companies should have a better sense of making sure that the younger people in the company are deciding not just how maybe even the funds are spent, but more how they're engaging it, so they take greater responsibility versus a top-down CFO mandated sort of approach. And then to Raj's point, we need to work with communities who are otherwise left out of the gambit of CSR because they don't speak the language, because mental health is a little harder to sort of monitor than the getting vaccines. And it needs to go to the areas that typically corporates do not operate in. And so I think with that, I just wanted to say thank you. I know somebody from Asia Society. Thank you, Radha.
Hi, quick introduction. I'm Radha Mahendru. I lead development and partnerships at Asia Society. I kept thinking about this, there's a legal philosopher, Robert Coder, and he talks about how law and regulation has a capacity for being world-maintaining and world-making. And I think this debate has helped kind of plot the journey we need to take from maintaining the status quo to a more just and equitable future. And it's clear that all of us as stakeholders, as responsible citizens, as humans, have our parts to play. And I hope that this is, and I want to thank Bloomberg, because I think while this is a close to one round of series, I hope this is a chapter that begins to a more deep and committed taking off or a point of departure to more things. Thank you to our great debaters. I want to thank Priya from Samhita, Vandana from Avanti Fellows, Trishya, who's the founder and director of Raindancer, and Raj Mariwala, who's the director of the Mariwala Health Initiative. And lastly, I think our moderator, who has done a fantastic job of, I think, unpacking a very complicated, complex topic, I think, and this format, I think, has been really engaging, and I hope we have more of this. Thank you.
2 minutes, one question.
One question.
The answer also has to be given.
No, I just wanted to clarify the cumulative CSR spend since F15, that is for 2014-15, has been 1 trillion rupees, not $1 trillion. Yeah, it's 15 or 16 billion dollars. The second point is that it's just this year it will be 8 basis points of India's GDP. You know, this group should know that government spending, central and state put together, is 50 times that amount. We're debating 2% of total social sector spending here. The government does 98% of it. We should be talking about how we can make that more efficient. Actually, I have 3 questions, but I'll reduce it to 1, which is that I didn't hear any comment on this revolutionary concept that was introduced last year, which is social capital exchange. It's going to just completely revolutionize private sector social spending in this country, and no other country on the planet has ever thought about it. I mean, we're going to have a stock exchange, you can't call it a stock exchange, but a social exchange where I can raise capital for social spending. It's way beyond CSR.
And so I think, Vandana, we have 1 minute left, so I don't know if people can answer, but I think these are really good points, and maybe we can, for those who want to mingle, I think we still have the ability to mingle going forward. Thank you all for coming on a Friday morning. Really, really good.